Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my crow. This is my crow host.
My crow host. I'm the crow host, Chris Huddleston.
He's made of crows, folks. Today
I'm a murder of crows.
We are very excited to be talking to you about a Christmas horror movie extravaganza that I had never seen before, Black Christmas. And do you have a synopsis for us, Monsieur Huddleston?
I do. Black Christmas is a 1974 Canadian film directed by Bob Clark, who also directed A Christmas Story. And it stars Olivia Hussey, Margot Kidder, Keir Dullea, Andrea Martin, John Saxon. And the synopsis from Rotten Tomatoes is, as winter break begins, a group of sorority sisters, including Jess, Olivia Hussey, and the often inebriated Barb, Margot Kidder, begin to receive anonymous, obscene phone calls. Initially, Barb eggs the caller on, but stops when he responds threateningly. Soon, Barb's friend Claire, Lynn Griffin, goes missing from the sorority house, and a local adolescent girl is murdered, leading the girls to suspect a serial killer is on the loose, but no one realizes just how near the culprit is. So I had seen this before, maybe a time or two before watching it for this recording, but you were completely unfamiliar with this.
Unfamiliar.
So you start.
Yeah, I was completely unfamiliar, and I was delighted. I thought it was really terrific. It drew me right in. It's this kind of warm, Christmassy environment inside of this 70s sorority house. The characters are well drawn right from the beginning. My only criticism with it would have to do with just the sort of early 70s pacing, which I think modern audiences are used to things really moving along at a MTV generation clip. This is a little more of a slow burn, but I was with it the whole way. And yeah, I mean, we should say from the get-go that we spoil these movies. So there's a great twist at the end that we are going to talk about. So if you're interested in seeing this movie, if you've never heard of it and you're like, oh, I never heard of that, I really encourage you, like I did, stop this now and go check it out, and then come back and listen to us talk about it, because I just thought it was great. What keeps you coming back to this one?
So I think there are a lot of interesting things about this. So it, like I told you last week, I felt like, I'm glad you enjoyed it, because I was sitting there watching it again this time, just thinking, this is a really great suspense movie. And I didn't feel like I steered you wrong in that this is not a gross out movie. There's these kill scenes, but it's not super sadistic or, bloody or gory or anything like that.
It's a slasher movie for sure, but not in the way they became in the 80s, where there's a lot of blood spraying everywhere and glorification of the act itself. The murders are scary, but they're more of a sudden shock than a drawn out torment.
Right. And as you said, it has a really great Christmas vibe. Everything in this movie is red. And so it like you, I think said it, they're in this big old sorority house, and it's very cozy. The characters are likable. You have the sorority house mother, or whatever the terminology, and she's kind of a comic relief character, because she's a drunk and she has her whiskey bottles just hidden everywhere. There's one scene where she has one inside a toilet, and I was thinking, like, I don't know if I'd want to drink out of a bottle that had been inside of a toilet, but anyway, so she, she's basically.
The thought that I had too is, like, you're an adult and you have a room, just keep a bottle in your room. Like, well, it's not like you're one of the students or something who's not supposed to be drinking. I mean, these are college students, so they drink, But she
Yeah.
has them hidden in these elaborate, like there's one in a cubby, a secret cubby. There's one in the back of the toilet.
Hidden inside of a book.
And I also thought it's hidden inside of a book, like
Yeah.
an Agatha Christie thing. And I'm like, people will find these. Like,
Yeah.
you literally have 30 bottles stashed. It's like somebody's going to stumble across it.
So yeah, I thought that was silly as well, because as you said, these are young adult women, and you have Margot Kidder, who's basically drunk throughout the whole thing too. And it's not like she's hiding it, she's openly drinking. So it's a little funny that but there are people who, not to get off on a side tangent or anything, but there are people who hide their drinking for whatever reason from the people around them. But so you have that great the great Christmas vibe. All of the characters are likable, and it's interesting to see some of these actors who this would have been really early in their career. So we've got Margot Kidder, who went on to be Lois Lane in the Superman movies, which those were a big part of my childhood. Olivia Hussey, I don't know that I know her from a lot, but she's just beautiful. She's just really, really gorgeous. And Margot Kidder as well. You have Andrea Martin, who went on to be in SCTV. That was another, I can remember watching SCTV with you on television. And you have Keir Dullea. Did you recognize him?
Yes.
From 2001 A Space Odyssey?
Yes.
So Dave from 2001 A Space Odyssey. And as I think I said, the suspense is great, even though I'd seen this before and knew what was going to happen. As you said, it is kind of a slow pace, but it is. I felt on the edge of my seat in a lot of this. This is much more. So this is what they call a proto-slasher, because it came. So basically, anything after Halloween from 1978 is considered the slasher era. And then some of these other movies took place before that, and it was before kind of this blueprint had been created. So one thing about watching this movie is you can see where a lot of other films ripped it off. So you have and I don't know that they were necessarily the first film to do some of these things, but I don't know if we said this or not, that it's one of the major spoiler is the calls are coming in from inside the house. That's been used, and that's just a joke at this point.
And this movie has been remade.
Yeah, it's been remade twice. Yeah, 2006 and I think 2016. You also have the point of view of the killer. So there's, the killer going around and you can hear him breathing. That's been used a lot. Another thing that I think is very interesting about this, and it's somewhat timely with what's going on in the world right now, is you have this abortion subplot. And I tried to find production date on this and I couldn't find it, but this came out December 20th, 1974, and Roe v. Wade passed January 22nd, 1973, which was 8 days before I was born. That's another thing, a little aside with this. These women in this film are a generation older than what we are. So we literally were babies when this came out, and they were 20 years old or whatever they were. But they feel very contemporary, other than just the clothing, the way they talk, the way they behave. These could be women in a movie in 2021.
Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting that so Jess, who is sort of the main character of the film, and then her boyfriend, Peter, who is Keir Dullea, she reveals to him that she's pregnant, and she just openly says, I'm going to have an abortion, and he's upset about that. So I would have to imagine for audiences in 1974, this was probably a pretty cutting edge thing to be presented in a mainstream film. I would have to guess.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that, it's kind of the more things change, the more they stay the same. So those are a lot of the reasons I think this is really well directed. It's interesting that Bob Clark, who did A Christmas Story, was the director of this. It's hard for me to imagine someone else who directed two Christmas films that are so different, you know. But I think that shows his skill as a director.
Yeah, I agree. I think all of that stuff crossed my mind. It was like, was this the first time that's been done? And it was. There's a lot of, I think of the films as the 70s as having this kind of like psychological element to it. Like there's a lot of psychology going on and exploring people's underlying motives and Jungian themes, and you know what I mean? So one thought that crossed my mind was, there's a thesis to be written here about the portrayal of these innocent victims, the objectification of the female in these movies, and to a larger degree society as the kind of target of these killers, and how the police treat them and how their fathers treat them and how their boyfriends treat them, because the male characters in this seem to tend towards broad stereotypes. There's the kind of incompetent cop, and then there's the competent cop.
John Saxon. Another great thing about the film. Yeah. John Saxon is great.
Who is a little, he cares about her, but there's a, he's doing his best to protect her. He's taking his job seriously, but the technology they have at the time when they're tapping the phones requires a long time of the connection. And they get frustrated because the caller keeps hanging up, and it's like, you got to keep him on the line. She's not doing anything. The guy's just hanging up. Like, how am I supposed to keep him on the line? And then the boyfriend, not that that's a particularly 70s thing or whatever. He's unstable anyway, that character.
He obviously has some anger issues.
Yeah, and he's the red herring. I think I was like, no, that's just a red herring. But there's at least one place in the movie I'm like, wait, could it be him? Could that be the twist, that somehow it is him? That's pretty good for a movie made in 1974 to get me, what, 40, 50 years later?
Yeah, almost 50 years, yeah.
After M. Night Shyamalan, after the twist is it's an expected thing, for me to still be like, wait, maybe it is him. Maybe they're twisting back on themselves. Like, that's pretty remarkable. I thought the killer it was laughable to me at first, the sort of killer cam, it's a handheld thing, and you sort of see his hands out pretty. Okay. As he goes and the calls progress, we actually start to get some sense of he's a raving lunatic. He is, we've talked about psychopaths and organized psychopaths like Hannibal Lecter. He's organized enough to know when not to come downstairs. Like, he waits until it's quiet or there's noise cover.
He hides up in the attic, we find out, and he goes down through he
comes down the ladder. Nobody thinks to look up at the attic. He comes down the ladder when it's an opportune time to commit a crime. He kills somebody vulnerable upstairs. And then he retreats back up into the attic, or then he calls downstairs to the other line. And his early calls are mostly incomprehensible. And as they go, he's doing other voices, and he's kind of recreating what we assume is the childhood trauma that made him crazy. And the more that gets fleshed out, the more disturbing it is, Yeah. Till by the end, it was really raising the hair on the back of my neck. I'm like, oh my God, what's not shown and what's not stated activates in your imagination. I can't I don't know who played the killer. He is uncredited.
Yeah.
And we never see his face. We know him as Billy because that's what he refers him to himself in the calls. But the most we ever see of his face is he's peeking through the crack in a door, and we see one kind of crazed eyeball as he's staring, and the person is seeing him. And this is near the end of the movie. But we don't see, a part of that is like, oh, well, maybe it's the boyfriend. Like, could it, we don't know what he looks like, so maybe it could be the boyfriend. But I just thought it was amazing that there was no line credit for Billy in the credits. And then you look up on IMDb, even to this day, it's just uncredited actor.
Mm-hmm.
He was the killer.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't even get a credit in the film. I mean,
and I kept trying to
pay him.
I kept trying to figure. I really paid attention this time. I kept trying to see if I could determine if maybe they had Keir Dullea record this, that it was maybe his voice, but I could never really tell for sure.
No, because the caller's doing, he's like, it's me, Billy. He's doing very, very acute voice changes.
He's doing a mother voice and a child voice.
Yeah. And there's like 4 voices that he does by the end. In the beginning, it's just a bunch of sort of screaming and mumbling and panting. And by the end, it's like playing out what we, the event he's reliving through these murders is more and more fleshed out. The ending of this thing, man, it really got me. So here we're I mean, we've already spoiled a lot of stuff. We're gonna spoil it all. So you think you're at the end and it's not quite over. That's not new. The idiot cop calls, right? The guy, the competent cop can't get to the house. So he calls the station and he tells the incompetent cop who's all's on duty, look, you got to call her. You got to tell her to just put down the phone and walk out the door. Do not tell her the guy is upstairs.
Yeah.
Don't screw this up. You just got to convince her to just walk out. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Okay, chief. Of course, he screws it up. He tells her. Now she's worried about her friends upstairs, who we know are already dead, but she doesn't know that. So she grabs a fireplace poker and heads upstairs. All horror movies, you're like, don't go in there. But I think one of the things that's so effective about the directing of this movie is all of it feels mostly plausible. Like, if she really cared about her friends, like, would you, knowing that your friends are upstairs and they might not be okay, you wouldn't go and at least try and help them in some way? I think most of us, well, you might or you might not, but it's not implausible. It's like, let's split up. I'll go into the room of blades and you go into the demon-filled basement. You're like, why would you split up? That's insane. But in this one, it's like, don't go upstairs, but it's plausible that she would.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Knowing the threat is upstairs. And I think time and time again, you're like, oh, they wouldn't hear the screams. Well, no, that's the moment that carolers come to the front door and the carolers are belting it out. And the one person who's downstairs who would need to hear the screaming upstairs is looking out the window and is paying attention to the carolers. And you think, and the screaming doesn't go on and on. I mean, the killing upstairs is a stabbing, so there's sort of a scream, but she doesn't hear it. And you think that's ghoulish and horrifying, but it's not implausible.
No.
So I thought that the directing for a movie like this that relies on a room full of women being isolated one at a time, you think, well, how are you going to pull that off and make it feel plausible? But this really does it. So at the end, so to get back to it. So at the end, he comes downstairs after her, and it's a pretty good chase scene, catches her by the hair and bangs her head. But she manages to get into the basement and lock the door, and he can't, it's a sliding bolt lock. He can't get through. So of course it's a very creepy basement. So she retreats further down to the basement. She hears him kind of walk away. And then she sees a silhouette outside. And of course, we assume it's him, that he has come outside and come around to sort of and trying to peer through the windows you can't see through. Eventually comes around, opens the door. It's her boyfriend, whom we know is unstable and who the cop thinks it might actually be him.
He actually knocks out so like you said, that I love the shot of the silhouette of him. He's going up to it's kind of the fogged over basement window because it's cold outside, and he's saying, Jess, are you okay? And then he breaks the glass out,
Yeah,
and comes in through the window.
yes, and she's already amped up, and he's very menacing. He has threatened her before. He says, don't do anything about don't you go take action on that baby, you'll regret it. I mean, he makes very explicit threats about that. So by this point, we're like, when he shows up and he breaks in, you're like, God, maybe it is him, We don't know what happens. Cops show up. Cops hear a scream, a blood-curdling scream. They run in there and they see two bodies, him collapsed on top of her, blood all over the place. And then she's in shock. She kind of comes to. And then they realize, oh, it's the boyfriend. And she is, clobbered him with the poker. And so we think, oh my God, it was him all along, right? And we at that point are not sure. We're like, maybe it was him. So they take her upstairs, which I think is crazy. Like, you would put her in an ambulance and you'd take her to the hospital. You would take her back up into the murder house across the hall from the bloody bed and all this stuff. But that's what they do. And she's out. Like, she's been given a sedative or something. And the doctor's like, I don't think she's going to wake up until this time tomorrow night. Like, what she needs is rest. So it's not her father, but it's the father of the first girl who goes missing is still in town. He's been there. They've all been awake. He's exhausted. He's in shock. There are some cops. Some other stuff goes on, and people kind of leave the room. He's going to pass out. So they're like, oh, we need to get him, we need to get him get an IV drip in him. They sort of usher him out, and she's left in the room alone. Now, there's a cop downstairs. They haven't all abandoned this victim in a 10-bedroom house where murders were just committed all alone. There's a cop downstairs and there's cops outside, but she's alone in this room. And then we creep back out of the room, and then we hear noises upstairs, and oh my God, it wasn't the boyfriend. He's still in the attic. But the camera doesn't linger and watch him come downstairs. The camera backs out of the house. So we're hearing him come down the stairs and him doing his little murmuring and his voices again. We know she's passed out in the room. And the camera backs out. And it's this big establishing shot of the house, which is where we started. And it's quiet. And there's a cop downstairs. We can see him down out front. He's smoking a cigarette. And it's quiet for a long time. And then the phone starts ringing. And they slowly bring up, and the credits start rolling, and the phone. So we know that he's climbed down, and now he's killed her too. And then he's doing what he does. He goes in the other room and he calls the phone, but there's nobody there to tap it or pick it up or hear it. And we know eventually they're going to find this guy. Like, he's disorganized. He's not going to leave the attic. They will discover that she's not, if he takes her back up in the attic like he does his earlier victims, they'll see she's not there and something's gone horribly wrong. Eventually, these people are going to get around to searching the whole. Nobody searches the house this whole time. I'm like, I can't understand where she's gone. I'm like, have you done a thorough search of the house? It's not until the matron at one point thinks she hears the cat up in the attic. There's no way the cat would get up in the attic. Cats don't climb ladders. But she climbs up and pokes her head through, and that's when he kills her and then drags her body up there. So the missing people their bodies are up in the attic. Sooner or later, they're going to find this guy.
Yeah.
Like, sooner or later. But it's too late for the woman that has become our heroine, who we think is the last one standing. And it's this really chilling end to a movie where you think, I think horror movies mostly get to a place where, like, Well, at least one of them survived to tell the tale, right? It's 6 friends and all 5 of them get butchered, but the last one figures out a way to push him into a combine harvester or something.
That was another one of the things that was created later was the idea of the final girl.
Of the survivor.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Not here, Jack.
Mm-mm.
And I thought, oh snap, that is old school. That is OG. It's like a zombie movie. Nobody
Yeah.
survives.
Right.
In a legit zombie movie, there's no escape. The dead walk the earth. It's over.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of time. Oh, you make it to the boat. You get on the boat. You ride in the island. The island's infested with zombies. Where are you going to go?
Yeah.
You know? And it had that feel. It's like nobody gets away.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Now, do you feel like the killer is just some unknown person, or is it one of the other male characters that we've been introduced to at some other point in the film?
No, I think Billy is Billy, and Billy doesn't
Mhm.
have any. I wondered why this house, why these people, but I didn't see anything in anything he said or anything that tied him specifically to the final girl or any of the others. He seems drawn specifically to that house in the beginning when he climbs up the outside, and he climbs up the outside. There's a specificity of purpose. Like he doesn't feel like he's just wandering around. He makes a beeline for that. Maybe this is just the killer cam. This is them pioneering this. I don't know, but it feels like he makes a beeline for that house and climbs up and has some sense of where the attic is and goes up in the attic. But it's not like, oh, it turns out it was her brother the whole time or anything. I didn't think it was any of the other male characters, with the possible exception of maybe it's the boyfriend, who is a very deliberate red herring and clearly unstable.
Yeah, and I think the mystery of all that is really great, because I think in other films, and especially maybe in newer films, they would, so we never know, as you said, why it's this house, why he went after these women. We get from, as the phone calls escalate, as you were saying, we get to know a little bit these other personalities that he has, but there's no scene where it's like, oh, here's the flashback where we're going to show you when Billy was abused as a child or whatever, and
right.
He did whatever. They just give us little bits of that, but it doesn't really matter. We don't need to know exactly what happened to him.
What we get is a sense of the depth of the trauma this individual suffered. And I think that's a very 70s thing too, as we began to understand the serial killer and what would make someone do this, right? As we became aware of this type of disorder and it started to seize the popular imagination, was like, well, they, a lot of times there's sexual abuse, there's physical and emotional abuse, there's neglect, there's like, it's trauma causes someone. And we get the sense from the repeated calls that although he doesn't kill the women in the same way, it's not like he's repeating a specific murder. It's almost like, because he keeps talking to his sister about, we need to hide what we did, and near the end, right before he kills, he refers to the women he's about to kill as the sister. So you think he and his sister, when they were young, maybe did something to the baby, or he was the baby, or they did something to the baby and he killed his sister to make her keep quiet, something like that. But he gets to stay a scary boogeyman because we've never seen him, and all we know about him are from these phone calls. And you don't get the sense like Hannibal Lecter, that he's always going to stay one step ahead of him. The horror is it's a monster that has crawled into your attic and nobody has thought to look up there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he could have been stopped at any time. He wasn't going to outsmart the cops. I mean, he's raving. You know, he's lost in some reliving some horrible thing that happened to him. He doesn't have a gun. Like they would have just shot him if they'd have found him. Probably
Yeah.
he'd have come running at them with the blunt instrument, and they just would have gunned him down. But that doesn't happen. He just keeps sneaking back up into the attic, and nobody even thinks to look up there.
And you know, there are real stories where similar things to this have happened, where like I read an article once about a guy that hid under a woman's bed for like a year or something like that, you know, and he would come out, you know, when she would go to work or whatever, he would come out, roam around, and then he'd go back in under the bed. I mean, he didn't kill her or anything, but and even instances where people have lived inside of the walls of a house, and you know, people didn't know, but that's not something that you ever, you know, you don't expect there to be a killer in your attic. So, you know, it makes sense that they never would have thought to look, you know.
Well, no one even, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Seems plausible because the first two people he kills, he hauls on. I don't know how you haul a body up a ladder, like, but you think about it too much. So,
Yeah.
well, the matron was already at the top of the ladder, so he didn't have to bring her far. And I guess
Right.
the first girl's pretty petite, but he has them up there with him in the attic, their bodies. It isn't until I guess the third and fourth women that he kills are left in the bedroom. One, he kills one in the bedroom, right? The other goes up to
Yeah,
check
Margot
on her,
Kidder.
and
Yeah.
he's still in the room behind the door. So when she goes in and sees that her friend is dead, he just is right there to pounce on her. And
Right.
then when what's her face comes, the last girl comes upstairs, she sees, well, no, who, it's not till later that she opens the door and those bodies are still there.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah,
And the
that's towards
police
the end, I
find those
believe.
bodies. The whole first half of the movie, we're concerned about this missing girl.
Yes.
And everybody's still just kind of hoping that she ran off with a friend or something, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they find there's another missing girl, a 13-year-old, who they find dead in the park.
Right.
And so that is enormously distracting for this small community. The cops are all abuzz about that. I mean, that's a horrible thing to have happened so near Christmas, and all of their resources are going towards searching for her, and then they find her and the press is all focused on that. So it isn't until later that somebody, I guess the final girl, comes in to complain about these obscene phone calls, that the competent cop is like, so a girl goes missing, another girl from the same address is reporting these repeated obscene phone calls. You don't think it's at least worth checking out? You know, all right, I'll check it out. The incompetent cop is just,
Yeah.
so he's human, but he's kind of punching the clock, and he's not a very bright bulb, and he's kind of, oh, we got a lot of stuff going on. You're like, oh my God.
And you know, that's another thing
Infuriating.
with the I think it's really plausible that the police would, you know, when they get there and she's killed Peter, I think it's really plausible that the police would just be like, well, he was the guy, because John Saxon was already really suspicious of him because of his behavior.
And
You know,
it's
and
not a thin trail either. Like he had
yeah,
a he had a he had a sort of final piano review or concert for his grade or whatever, and it didn't go well.
he smashes up the piano.
And he smashes up the piano with a music stand, and the piece itself is this very, you know, dissonant and chaotic, frantic thing. And then his response to her telling him that she doesn't want to get married and doesn't want to have his baby, you know, he becomes very distraught and he threatens her. And so she tells the cop this. I mean, he kind of draws it out of her, But then the cop goes and does some investigating, and he sees that this is an unstable guy, and he smashed up the piano, and it starts to look,
Pretty incriminating for him.
well, it was like,
Yeah.
where are the other suspects?
Yeah.
I mean, like, how many people do we have to pick from?
Right.
And so the cop is like, he says, I don't want it to be him. But I mean, I think we have to go with the evidence. We're like, who else might be doing such a thing? And she's like, oh, he would never do something like this. And he doesn't brush her off, but he's following legitimate leads.
Yeah.
And it's just always, he's at it. When she comes into immediate threat, he is at his furthest away. It's just the timing of everything feels like this tragic set of unfortunate coincidences. And
tragic is the right word.
But it's plausible the whole way through. That's great directing.
Yeah, I agree, for sure. Yeah, tragic is the right word, because even though you don't like the boyfriend very much, it's like, well, it's a shame that he got killed and he was innocent. He might not be a great guy, but it doesn't appear that he's a murderer.
Right.
Another thing that
you
go
don't
ahead,
really
sorry.
you don't feel bad for the killer.
No.
But the calls are scary, and the thought does cross your mind. You think, oh my God, what a nightmare of a life this individual had. Not that justifies murder, or you say, well, let's get him some help. No, this is a person that needs to be incarcerated or institutionalized for the rest of their life. Clearly they can't be running around, but you do think, as you start to get a picture of what's going, the calls are almost cries for help.
Yeah.
At one point, I think he is sort of sobbing, saying, God, please help me. Please, somebody stop me. Somebody help. Something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And if not sympathy, then there's at least a flicker of pity that you think this monster was made, whether deliberately or just by circumstance, that these horrible acts are somehow the end result of acute suffering,
Yeah.
And that just makes it all the worse, because it's not Freddy Krueger or the demon who appears in the video cassette. It's not some incarnate evil. It's another person doing these horrible things. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I agree. And you talked about the kind of bleak ending, and this may be me reading too much into this or putting too much on this, but it's pretty common that horror, good horror, reflects what's going on in society at the time. And when you got into the 70s, you'd had the kind of 50s, 60s where you had the creature features, where giant ants and stuff like that. And that was all the atomic era. And then, once you got into Vietnam era and people were seeing all these horrific things with the war, then giant ants or giant spiders or whatever weren't scary anymore. And you also had the, this would have been coming off of, so we had the abortion issue with this, and also this would have been coming off of Watergate, when, it was kind of like up to Watergate, people had more, trusted the
Faith.
systems and all of that. And then
Faith
people
in the
became,
systems.
then people became, if we can't trust the president, we can't trust anything, and became very disillusioned,
and the concept that so often, Watergate, there was definitely deliberate malfeasance, but it was a whole lot of human error,
right,
and a whole lot of, not evil in the way that we think of Adolf Hitler, but just petty. Like the whole beginnings of Watergate was like, he won that election in a landslide. You don't need to bug, but his petty need to like fix the game or just get the edge on the opponent and play dirty. It's, now you look at it, it's almost quaint.
Yeah.
Watergate, that's such, we just had an insurrection. So it's like, but I think you're absolutely right that a lot of this movie is like, if everybody were just doing their job a little more, like if everybody was just a little more focused, if everyone was a little more on it, it feels very human in that way across the board, that people are fallible, and wrapped and self-centered and wrapped up in their own things. And all of that feels remarkably plausible.
Oh, sure.
And at the end, there's this sort of if only, if only, if only, if only, if only, all of this could have been averted.
And it's sad because you have these girls in the prime of their life at this, what's supposed to be kind of the happiest time of the year, Christmas time. And, this really, and it's sort of like, they're not safe, even in their own home that they're living in while they're in college. And even with, you have the thing with the police. And again, this is a trope that's been used over and over again, where they have the cop that's stationed outside to watch them, and he gets, you find out at the end he's been killed.
Well, I wonder who did that. I mean, did the guy come down out of the attic? That's the presumption, is that he would have had to do it, but that struck me as very organized thinking.
Well, he'd gotten out to kill the girl, the young girl at some point, so.
Are we, I mean, we presume that he killed the little girl in the
park. Presumably.
I wondered if that hadn't happened on his way to the house.
Could be, yeah.
Came across
that's true.
her in the park, and then
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, and they didn't find her till later.
Yeah, but that's possible.
Because I'm like, once he's holed up in there, why is he coming back out? But
one more thing that I think is interesting about this movie, that something that was handled much differently when this real slasher trope was established, is these girls are never sexualized.
Right.
They're just characters. They're just women. There's no, this is one in the shower. Or this is, so there's never any, again, they're attractive women, but there's never any, they're not walking around in their underwear or anything like that. So that's something that definitely goes against the grain of what would come later.
Although you're absolutely right, and that struck me as well. Although there is a fair amount of, in the beginning, when the first girl to go missing, her father shows up because she didn't show up to meet him and go home for the holidays. He comes to the house and is scandalized by the kind of sexual liberation, the evidence of which he sort of sees all over the house, a peace poster where it's a man and a woman are naked and she's lying on top of him and you can see her butt, and they're making a peace sign, right? So his legs are spread and she's lying on top of him, and there's a comic bit where the house mother sort of spots it and covers up, the indecent bit, and just the sort of women's lib, like, oh, these young women are people and they are sexually independent, and they drink what they want and they date who they want and they sleep with who they want, and we like to think of them as our innocent little girls, but they're women now, and that's part of their life too and part of their independence. And that is seen through the eyes of a prim, admittedly, father, who is worried about his daughter and is sort of like, well, I didn't send her here for, and you're like, well, I don't know what your deal is, dude, but she's 21 or whatever she is, but it also struck me too that the killings have nothing to do, it's not a sexual expression.
No,
the murder that this perp is doing isn't a replacement for sexual gratification.
Right.
It's the reliving of some earlier event that he's stuck in.
And we definitely get in the later films, later slasher films, it very much becomes the trope is the, and it's women, but also sometimes it's men as well, are killed because they're bad, because they have sex or they do drugs or they drink or whatever. And there's no judgment made in that way about these girls. I wonder, it's hard to say 50 years out what the um, what the view would have been of this film for audiences at the time. But you have to feel like, things have progressed so much since then. But I'm sure maybe if older audiences saw this, it seems like they were really making a statement with, okay, this is how younger women are now today, and that's okay, it was probably much more scandalous to older, maybe if someone was watching this who was more the age of the father, than it would be today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would be surprised if this movie was aimed at that audience. I would think it'd be much more aimed at the college audience.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, there's politics in this movie,
Hmm.
not deep under the surface.
It's not beating you over the head with anything.
Absolutely not. But
Yeah.
it's there in the, there's a class thing too, with the sort of den mother.
Mhm.
Why does she hide her drinking? Well, maybe, I don't know who employs her, if the college employs her, if the sorority employs her, but she'd probably lose her job if they knew she was an alcoholic. You know what I mean?
And probably just women of her generation, wasn't acceptable.
Yeah, and you see that to comic effect a number of times when she's sort of yelling obscenities at the cat, and then there's Mr. What's his face, and she's like, "Oh, I'm ready to go whenever you are, sir." And she just toggles back and forth between the good face and the real face, which is like, it's a job. Nobody appreciates what I do,
Yeah. And it's a little bit interesting that he is also, she's played for comic relief, but so is the dad. And, we find out later, or maybe we know, most of the film, that his daughter has been murdered. So he's actually a tragic figure too.
Yeah, and the first murder happens very, very early in the film. Very
Mhm.
early in the film, and then things get quiet for a while. Like the whole plot unwinds gradually, but one of the first things that happens is the first killing.
Yeah.
And I thought it was shocking. I thought that image with her with the plastic over her face was genuinely scary. I was like, oh, she sits up and there's a kind of a thrill of strings, but
Mhm.
it's genuinely upsetting. And then we return to her. She's up in the attic. He's got her sitting
Yeah.
in a rocking chair, her body. And he's talking to her, but we never see him. I can't believe they didn't credit. Who shows up in a movie in any way and doesn't get a credit? Like, not an extra. The guy has lines.
Well, it was Canadian, so I don't know if they, their laws were a little bit different. I don't know. And another thing, there were a bunch of these, but I believe this movie was, so there was an era there where, and you really got into Cronenberg, really got established with this, where there was a special tax break in Canada for filmmakers. So, people were, that became kind of a business model for a little while. It's like, oh, we can make a cheap horror movie, and we can, we get a tax credit for it. And with this one, I think it said the budget was about 620,000 and it made over 4 million. So, I mean, that's pretty good size hit for 1974.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great movie. I mean, I unreservedly recommend it.
Yeah, I do as well. And I'm glad that, so I was watching this and I thought, I think Chris is going to like this, but I wasn't sure. Like I said, it's not a gross out movie. Probably the most disturbing aspects of it are some of the phone calls, because they are really obscene. The things, that he's saying to them. But yeah, I think it's, if you like, horror, suspense, I think this feels a lot like a Hitchcock. Maybe if Hitchcock had been doing stuff a little bit later. um, and it's great to watch this time of year because you have that excellent Christmas vibe in it. And so yeah, I feel like, um, this is probably one that a lot of people haven't seen. And, especially maybe if you want to see kind of the origins of a lot of the stuff that came later. I mean, this was definitely ripped off a lot.
Yes.
The sequels I have seen, and I don't remember enough about them to say whether,
Well, there you
whether to
go.
watch them or not. But
You don't remember enough about them, so
yeah. So yeah, I highly recommend this one. I read that supposedly Elvis loved this movie and would, I don't know how many years this would have been before he died, but they said he would watch this, like after it came out, he would watch this each Christmas. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Yeah,
little feather in its cap.
exactly. Yeah.
You
So
would
yeah.
watch it while seated on the toilet.
And what did you watch this on? Prime?
Yeah.
Okay.
It
Yeah, so
looked
it's
good.
on Prime. Yeah. So yeah, highly recommended.
Yes. And you sent me a couple of interesting trailers that I watched that I thought
Hmm.
looked good. At least one interesting trailer. Have you watched anything since we last spoke? I have not. I've been kind of traveling and reading.
I started a movie last night that I've only watched like half of. I watched it and got tired and didn't finish it. A Belgian movie called Advent Calendar about this girl who is a paraplegic, and on her birthday, which happens to fall around Christmas time, her friend gets her this gift from Germany, which is an Advent calendar, this like huge wooden Advent calendar. And basically, as she uh, opens up the door for each day and eats a piece of candy, it's kind of something that she wants to happen or wishes to happen then happens. Like her father has Alzheimer's, and he doesn't remember her anymore. And she wants to talk to him for her birthday, but she knows that he doesn't remember her anymore. And when when she eats the piece of candy, then her father calls her and wishes her a
Oh,
happy birthday.
so they're like little
Um,
Christmas wishes.
yeah, so little Christmas wishes, but then it gets to be sinister. She goes on a double date with a friend, and the friend kind of hooks up with one guy, and another guy drives her home. And on the way home, he stops and basically tries to assault her. And, she's like, leave me alone. And he then throws her out of the car and just pushes her wheelchair over, uh, on the side of the road with her. When she gets home, it's time to open the next little door, and she eats the candy. And when she does, she finds out the next day that the guy was killed in a car accident on the way home. So
So there's like a
it,
monkey's paw element
it
to
like a
it.
monkey's paw kind of thing. It's not super original, and I doubt the ending is going to be super original. But what I've seen so far, it's just really well done. It's well acted and well made. It's a Belgian film. So that's the only thing that I've watched recently that I can think of. I think the other stuff that I watched most recently we talked about last week. So what have you been reading?
Oh, I'm
Is it
reading
that Wheel of
I'm
Time?
on book 2 of Wheel of Time now. Yeah,
Okay,
still enjoying it.
cool.
It's high fantasy.
Hmm.
And it's starting to get a little soap opera-y, like the actual stuff that happens unfolds relatively slowly, and it's about the relationships. There's a lot of internal stuff about them. But I'm hooked on it now, so we'll see where
Oh,
it
cool.
goes.
And you said it's several books, right? Like 8 or 10 or something?
I thought there were 12.
Oh,
Something said
wow.
there were 14. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean it goes on and on. It's very derivative of Lord of the Rings. There's a dark lord. There are the sort of chosen unlikelies that have to go on this labyrinthine quest. And uh, there are fundamental differences too, but certainly in book 1, there's like, okay, well, somebody took a synopsis of Lord of the Rings and then
Hmm.
condensed it into the the plot of this book. But it's, fertile source material. So
I wonder how much fantasy, has really reinvented the wheel, no pun intended, since Lord of the Rings. There's kind of
I
you
don't
know,
know, because I read Lord of the Rings and I didn't read I read horror, I read Stephen King. And so that's a branch of fantasy fiction. But I didn't read a lot of swords and sorcery stuff, none that I can really remember. As a kid, there was a series called The Black Cauldron for young readers. I think I read that. And
I, as a kid, read several of the Robert E. Howard Robert E. Howard Conan books back then, and those are those are kind of, I mean, those were written in, I think, the 20s and 30s. They're kind of problematic, I'm sure, now because they're really misogynistic, but I was 11 or 12 or 13 or something,
that's just how it is in barbarian land.
This is how it is with the barbarians. I also read some of and I know they did an adaptation. I think the Sci Fi Channel did it, but I read some of the Shannara books. Did you ever read any of those? Sword of Shannara and those other ones, Terry Brooks?
No, but that sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, those are, at the time I thought they were really cool. And
well, Game of Thrones
properly could be really
I read all those books. I'm waiting to finish reading those books. I'm wondering, I'm like, is he ever going to finish that?
So I actually heard just the other day that on another podcast, so they were talking about the spinoff, or I think they're doing multiple spinoffs. I don't know, but I guess he is writing the spinoff. But they were just like, why not just finish the books, But I think
he wrote a prequel, a whole prequel that is like what one of these HBO spinoffs is based on, which is about I mean, I don't want to bore you with
no
all the names, but one of the protagonists is from a family called the Targaryens, and they were apparently conquered the whole thing. So it's 300 years before the events of Game of Thrones take place. And it's one book, but it's a Game of Thrones sized book. And he wrote that, so there's, I guess there's 7 books and he's written 5. And people have been waiting on book 6 for, I want to say 7 or 8 years now. Meanwhile, he's doing all this stuff. I'm like, dude, finish the series.
I think he seems to almost, in interviews that I've seen, and I don't know a lot about Game of Thrones, but in interviews that I've seen, he seems to almost relish the fact that it drives the fans crazy that he hasn't finished them. But, he seems,
you hear some of these people spout off about it. You don't anymore, but some people take it like he owes it to them or something, or like it's their property. Like he's a contractor that they paid him to build a house and he hasn't finished yet. I don't, he doesn't owe me anything, but I'm like, you've got the hook in me pretty good, man. It's like, just tell me, like, do you ever intend to finish it? Why don't you give the property to somebody else to finish? Just so I have some closure. I'm 5 deep. Can I get 2 more, please?
There's a good interview that you can find on YouTube with him and Stephen King, and they're kind of interviewing each other. And, Stephen King is this guy where, as you know, where it's just like, oh yeah, over the weekend I wrote an 800-page book,
Right.
And George R. R. Martin seems very much not that guy, that it's like much more laborious for him to get through it.
Yeah.
And, he talks about that some in the interview. So I mean, I don't blame him almost, just be like, hey, I'm making all this money just producing these different things,
Hey, and more power to him. Yeah. More power to him. But I think that you don't need to look much farther than that. In his so he writes author notes about each one, and I remember on the author notes or the forward or something on the last book he wrote was like, the last one was really hard and this one was twice as hard. And so I'm feeling like, as the pressure builds to tie off this epic 7-book series in a, and how bitterly disappointed with fans of the show were. So once they got to the point after he'd written, they had to make up their own ending, and they did that in consultation with him. But there's a lot of complaints from people being like that the final season of Game of Thrones is epically disappointing. Not because it doesn't look good or anything else, but there's these plot lines that they have nurtured and milked over the whole series, and suddenly, and then he kills her and she does that and he does it at the end. And you're like, You took 8 episodes for these 2 characters to like cross this part of the country, and we got this entire plot line with the living dead is tied off in 1 episode. Like, that's a whole season right there, you know. So I don't know. I think maybe the creators that were just getting tired of doing it too, because viewership wasn't falling off. I mean, that was like, I know it was getting more and more expensive. I know that they were spending more and more money and taking longer and longer to shoot it. But I don't know that that was required. I think they could have eked out 3 more television seasons of that show, and the audience would have been just as rabid as ever.
And this was something I was having a conversation with some friends about this just a few nights ago. And we were talking about Game of Thrones and other shows as well, where, and I'm sure the people who are in charge of these shows, you know, don't want to relinquish anything and have new people come in or whatever. But it's somewhat amazing. Also, I think some of these shows are on such, the budgets are not the budget is not what I'm going for, but the, you know, the time budget is so tight that you almost wonder if, and you know, of course they want to get it out to people as fast as, you know, it's like strike while the iron is hot, but you kind of wonder with these, as often as, you know, you think about really big shows like Lost and, you know, the Game of Thrones and Dexter, you know, which they brought, which all shows that people weren't happy with the endings of them, that you wonder almost if these studios would be better off just saying, okay, for the final season or the last couple of seasons or whatever, we're going to take our time and really come up with a great storyline. But I think it's just, we got to get this out here because we got to make sure it's hot, and, you know, people haven't, maybe people are going to decide they don't want to come back to this, you know.
Well, I think you also run the risk of losing your talent.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, you get a Kit Harington, or you get some of these other Emilia Clarke, who had acting gigs before, but this was such a catapult for them, that they start getting other offers. They're starting to get feature film offers, or they're starting to get offers like, what do you want to make? I'll put you in whatever you want to do. And of course, their agents are like, all right, we're done with season 7. Let's come back to the table and talk about season 8. And their agent's like, we went 5 times the money. You're gonna make another season without Jon Snow? How are you gonna do that? It's got to be him. Pay up. I mean, that's what happened with Downey Jr. and Iron Man, and they got him.
Yeah,
they got him by the short hairs, and he's like, yeah, he wants $50 million for this role. He wants points on the film, and the studio's like, what? No way. And he's like, okay, bye. And like, wait. You know, so it's like, it happened with The Walking Dead too, which went on a good long time, but that is a show about Rick Grimes. It's an ensemble show with a lot of great people in it. But the property of The Walking Dead is about Rick Grimes. And Andrew Lincoln, that actor, I don't know what came up for him, but at a certain point, he stepped out of it.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know, and I have continued to watch the show, and there's a lot of great people on it, and I'm not slamming the show. But at a certain point, you know, people they don't want this to be their whole career. Like, I've been doing this for a decade.
Well, and you have the same thing with the writers too. You know, I was kind of, you know, insinuating maybe with some of these shows that you bring in new blood, that can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing.
Can be a bad thing.
And when these shows are successful, then writers start to leave, you know, the maybe not the head writer, but the other writers start to leave and become showrunners of other shows. And then sometimes when you're bringing somebody in new, then it gets all messed up. And you see this a lot where characters start to become caricatures of themselves, where it's like, oh, that character wouldn't do that, you know.
And no studio is going to say, oh, we had a great first season and second season was even better. Let's see, there's 7 books. I'm going to sign you for a contract for 5 more seasons.
Yeah.
Right? No studio does that. Not even HBO with deep pockets. You know, they might say, we'll sign you for another season with a clause that says if we do a season after that, that you agree that you're on board. If we do that, see, you know, they go, okay. And so that season goes better and better. And then they have to come back to the table. And they're like,
Yeah.
let's
That
add a
was
couple of zeros on there, guys.
and that's interesting. You bring that up, and you talked about Robert Downey Jr. I don't know if you saw, and I don't think we talked about this before, um, with Tom Holland with the Spider-Man movies, when this one was about ready to come out, and he was like, "Yeah, I think this is my last Spider-Man movie." And I don't want to be playing this. I think I'm playing this character when I'm 30. Something's wrong. So I think this is probably going to be it. And then Disney was like, "Not so fast. 3 more movies." So it's like he signed on to 3 more.
Well,
So,
Disney, I mean, they're such monoliths now.
mhm.
It's actually a lot like the studio system in the golden age or whatever. I mean, they had almost bottomless pockets.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Disney showed up. Disney owns Star Wars now. Disney owns Marvel now. I'm sure Disney showed up and said, Tom, I'm going to write a number on a piece of paper,
Mhm.
and we just want you to think about it. And they wrote some bonkers number. I mean, he
Yeah.
looks at it, he goes, I'm going to say no. It's only 3 more movies. I mean, I can do that.
And it'll be interesting to see if he is like two of my favorites that have really leveraged being in these giant franchises are Elijah Wood. He did the Lord of the Rings movies, and now it's just kind of like, I'm going to do whatever I want, whatever. I mean, he has his own production company, and also,
You're rich. You're
yeah.
rich, dude. And what's amazing to me is how they got Ian McKellen back, because
Mhm,
I love this. I love that franchise.
mhm,
They went away for a decade to shoot those first movies.
yeah.
And I remember Viggo Mortensen wasn't gonna take it because he's got a kid.
Mhm,
It's like, I'm gonna go to New Zealand for 10 years, not a prison sentence. They took breaks, but
sure.
you're just away doing that for a whole chapter of your life. And they renegotiated and they came back, and I'm sure that made all of them rich. But then Ian McKellen came and shot 3 more movies in The
Mhm,
Hobbit.
yeah.
And you think, in Orlando Bloom, some other people came back too, but you're like, so that's 20 years of your
Mhm,
life on that single character, that single franchise. I have a feeling harder to do with Gandalf's character, but like with Orlando Bloom, I have a feeling they organized the shooting. They knew they were going to do all 3 of those movies, and they just
yeah.
said, okay, we're going to bring you down here for 6 months. We're going to shoot out as much of your stuff as we can, and we'll probably need to bring you back for reshoots for another 6 months later. It wasn't like the first time where they all went and decamped and shot the whole thing in one fell swoop.
Mhm.
That's crazy. That is,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, when you're a young actor, that's like, this is it, man. But when you're his age, it's kind of like, I don't know how much. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what his life is like. But
The same thing. It's similar to Elijah Wood. You have Daniel Radcliffe, who was Harry Potter, and it's the same thing. He was in this gigantic franchise, and now he just kind of does whatever. He does some kind of weird, little movies, and
oh, he's
um,
made it. If he ever needs a little
yeah,
spare change, he can do an ad as Harry Potter if they license
yeah.
him. He could go to a Comic-Con and just sign.
And he's coming back. There's another Harry Potter that he's going to be in, which I don't know exactly what they're doing with that, but
Oh,
there's
is
a
there
trailer. Yeah, there's another one where he's older. So uh,
another movie? Not
I don't know
the
if it's a.
HBO anniversary thing where it's like
I,
they're all. It's just a celebration of the whole franchise.
no, it's actual. There's a trailer with him in character, but he's older and I think has long hair and maybe a beard, and yeah.
No
So
kidding, and it's Harry
yeah,
Potter.
yeah,
I'll be
it's Harry
damned.
Potter.
Well, I mean, I guess
So
it's stupid to think that they would leave that alone. That is a golden goose.
oh yeah. Did you ever read any of those books?
Oh yeah, I've read
Yeah.
them. I read them solo before I had kids.
Hmm.
Uh, just because I was up at we have a summer place up on Lake Michigan, and I
Hmm.
was up there, and there's nothing to do up there but read. And one of my cousins, or I guess my nephew or my niece, who was appropriately aged for him, had left him around, and I had heard all of this buzz, and I'm like, Harry Potter, right? Whatever, how
Hmm.
good can it be? And I just was in between books, and I picked it up, and it sucked me right in, and I gobbled them all up. And then I have 2 kids, and I read the whole series with both of my kids, like at
Hmm.
bedtime. I mean, it's great. There's a reason
Yeah.
why it's such a big hit, is it's really special.
Oh yeah. I only ever read the first one, but the movies are great. I really enjoy them, you know. Um,
I think
so
if you ever find yourself in a position where you have a young reader and
mm,
you're in charge at bedtime, if they have an imagination that tends and that likes the fantasy stuff, it's really great.
oh
And
yeah.
it really, it's so smart, because if you have a reader who's even in proximity of the age, each year they get, I mean, you don't wait you don't read one a year, but when they
Yeah.
were coming out, she didn't have them all pre-written. So
Hmm.
she wrote them based on the age her kids were when they were in school. And if your kids were that age, one came out each year, and then they were
Right.
the age of the protagonists. And it was just
Yeah. I,
genius.
I know if they had been out when we were kids, I'm sure I would have eaten them up, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean, they are children's books. Not that
Right.
adults can't enjoy them. They're children. They're written for children,
Mm,
young readers.
yeah.
We're
So
over time. So what are we going to do for next time?
we had talked about Batman Returns. What do you think about that?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's another holiday one.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
so
I'll
okay.
revisit that one.
Sounds good.
That's the Tim Burton sequel to The Batman. No.
Which was very, not to, just really quick thing. I don't know if I told you about this or not, but just in the last week or two, um, Danny DeVito did an interview with some magazine and said that he's the Penguin in that film and loved playing the Penguin. And he said that was just a really special time for him in his career. And he said that he would love to play that character again if they could get Tim Burton back to do it. He's just like, if they get Tim Burton, and I thought that's one of those things DC's doing, Marvel's doing multiverse stuff, DC's doing multiverse stuff where they're bringing back um, Michael Keaton to be Batman, and Ben Affleck's going to be Batman, and you have this other, with Robert Pattinson Batman. And I thought, why the hell not? They should just throw a bunch of money at Tim Burton and just be like, hey, we're going to do another, this will be its own little universe thing.
Yeah, if he's interested.
Yeah. He may not be at this point. I don't know, but
Yeah, he certainly doesn't need the money, but
no.
you don't know how they convince each other to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
so
all right.
Batman Returns, the Tim Burton version from the 80,
92, I
92,
believe.
92,
Yeah.
okay. Danny DeVito and
Michelle
Michelle
Pfeiffer is
Pfeiffer.
Catwoman, and Christopher Walken is, I forget what his character's called, but another
Oh
bad guy.
yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot about Christopher
Yeah.
Walken. Excellent.
It's a crazy movie.
Yes,
So,
great. Yeah, and it's a Christmas themed thing. It's right in our wheelhouse. Awesome. Chris and
yep.
Chris talk movies at gmail.com. We're on YouTube. We're on your podcasts. We are right behind you. No.
We're in the attic. Don't go up there.
Guys, you got it. If you haven't seen Black Christmas, I know we just ruined it for you. It's really good.
And just in time for Christmas. I mean, this is one that you can watch, after the
Right.
kids are in
Watch it.
bed on
Yeah,
Christmas Eve,
don't
or
watch it with the kids, I think.
no, not good
But
for, I mean, teenage kids, although they might get kind of embarrassed at some of the words that the obscene phone caller says, but
maybe.
yeah.
Anywho, anything else to add before we sign off for this
I think
episode?
we covered a lot. So
we did. We covered a lot. We got well off track, but that's what we do.
Makes it fun.
So, Chris Huddleston, Chris Ferry, we will talk to you next week.